had such a magical time seeing Maestro, thanks to Netflix, who got me a very nice seat at the North American premiere of the film during the New York Film Festival, which just happens to take place at Lincoln Center. And David Geffen Hall is where they showed the film. And in fact, it's just been remade over and named David Geffen Hall. So they turned it into a Dolby Theater for this premiere. But that, of course, is the iconic home of the real Leonard Bernstein when he was the head of the New York Philharmonic. And in fact, when you go in there now, they have a very nice little exhibit showing pictures of Leonard Bernstein and going over his accomplishments and what he did for the New York Philharmonic, Lincoln Center, and classical music in general. So I know a little bit about Leonard Bernstein. I knew a little bit about him going in. I'm familiar with the space that he was in. And I think that's actually not good for watching this movie. If you want to see Bradley Cooper try to win an Oscar, then I think you'll enjoy this more. But if you're actually looking for a movie that is about Leonard Bernstein and underscores his incredible accomplishments and shows you how classical music and musical theater became a part of mainstream Americana, well, then this is not the movie for you. Because it ended up being an interesting experience. I could not have been more excited going in, but I ended up both hating the film, but still to some degree respecting it, largely due to the colossal effort made by Bradley Cooper to win an Oscar. I mean, he tries so hard. At some points, it's impressive. Now, I'm going to share these complex thoughts with you now, and I'm very curious to hear your own thoughts and reactions to the film. It's having a slow rollout before it hits theaters and then eventually Netflix for awards season. But I think a lot of people obviously are going to check this out. But I will say it's a very pretty film, and I enjoyed the 1950s, 60s, and 70s nostalgia kick. Now, I believe the film transitions from black and white to color, just like Oppenheimer. It's interesting. Oppenheimer, I think, two very unlikable guys who kind of ruined their families to a degree. But I think that Oppenheimer at least showed the full picture. But anyway, I think that the reason this movie's transition from black and white to color was when movies did, which I think is a bit superficial. It's like, and then movies suddenly were in glorious Technicolor, and this movie imitates Technicolor quite well. But you're like, but that's why you did it? I mean, I'm pretty sure Leonard Bernstein's life was always in color. He didn't change when he's not like, and Leonard Bernstein didn't go to the movies all the time either. So, but anyway, director Bradley Cooper does do a very good job mimicking the style of movies in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. There's one shot in black and white of a bus on a residential street, and it could be right out of a 1940s film. I was very impressed. So that, as a cinephile, it's fun to see those recreations. You're like, oh yeah, you did it. It looks just like a movie from that time period. That's awesome. Little Douglas Sirk in there. I like that stuff. And in fact, I would say that while Cooper is playing a musical conductor, it's as if here he's actually a visual conductor of film. And all the bits and pieces from different time periods of filmmaking are swirled together by Cooper into one, as I said, visual symphony. And so I think that's very interesting. In fact, I think he's more interested in a visual symphony than a musical symphony because there's so little music in the actual film, which we'll talk about. And I have to say, while Bradley Cooper's performance is also very surfacey, literally, as he lets the prosthetics and wigs do a lot of the work for him, but thankfully, for the most part, they're pretty darn good wigs and prosthetics, or at the very least, interesting ones. You're like, that's an interesting look. It really commands your attention. But Cooper's Leonard Bernstein is the life of the party, a surprisingly silly man. But his joy and energy is so infectious, he comes across almost like a character in a children's book, with his oversized features, wild hair, and when we get to color in particular, fantastic outfits made with bright colors and very finely and interestingly tailored. What a fashion plate, I must say. Cooper could often also easily be playing Danny Kaye as well. If you know who all these people are, again, the movie I don't think rings as true. But Danny Kaye, interestingly enough, was from the same time period, also musical, also Jewish, and interestingly, while Kaye never came out of the closet like Bernstein did, there have long been rumors about Kaye's sexuality. But the bigger-than-life persona might be why Bernstein was so successful on television with his Young People's Concerts, which aired on CBS for 14 years. And it's so odd to me that this show, this television show, is never really touched upon in this movie Maestro, because it's probably what made Bernstein a household name in America, or was a big part of it. I mean, West Side Story 2, which is also barely... It's like one line in the movie, and they play a little bit of the music in one scene. I'm like, are you kidding me? But anyway, I think the television show is crucial to Bernstein being a part of Americana. Just like Alfred Hitchcock, well, of course he was known. It was Alfred Hitchcock Presents, where he introduced each episode that really made him a household name. Being in people's homes regularly is very, very effective. Just ask Julia Child, Mr. Rogers, Rod Serling, Johnny Carson, Jay Leno, and so many others. So the fact that Leonard Bernstein had that and it's not underscored is very weird. So I'm glad I could point it out to you. I would have liked to have seen him filming that. And not only did I think it made him a household name, but what a wonderful thing for him to do, to share classical music with children and to get them to be interested in it and to teach them about it. And how many people did he get into the into music as a career and continue to make sure it thrived, at least for a while, with that new lifeblood? I mean, that's really incredible. And I would say that on that note, it really bothers me that Maestro totally ignores Bernstein's work, choosing to focus almost entirely on his very messy and dramatic personal life. I mean, I'm sure it's interesting, but his monumental achievements are interesting as well. I don't see how you can truly portray Bernstein without exploring the driving force of his life, his career. It reminds me of the recent movie about Steve Jobs, which in the end stripped away all of his incredible accomplishments. So at the end of the movie, they decided to really just judge him. That's the note they left you on, that he didn't have a good relationship with his daughter, as if that was all that really mattered in the end. They're like, who cares what else Steve Jobs did? His daughter hated him. And you're like, well, I didn't really hear Steve Jobs' side of the story. And personal relationships are very complex and hard to get in on. And I think it's not fair to not include all the incredible things that he did and how he changed society forever. And I would say the same for Leonard Bernstein. Now, of course, personal relationships are incredibly important, and Felicia Montalegre sacrificed her career for her personal relationship with Bernstein and their children. And she has one line about personal relationships, which I thought was particularly moving, particularly because her life was so awful. But then, why not tell the movie from her perspective? Here, the woman behind the man stays the woman behind the man. She's the woman behind Bradley Cooper. It makes Carey Mulligan the woman behind Bradley Cooper. He keeps getting these women to try and prop up his Oscar wins and then inadvertently gives them like a little bit of a better role. Same with Lady Gaga. Like, what were Felicia's dreams? What did she do all day? Well, Bernstein clearly did whatever the heck he wanted to do. The movie never shows us. For the most part, if Bernstein isn't interested in her, the movie isn't. Unless it's to show how much Bernstein's self-centered behavior is quietly destroying his wife. Not even Felicia's life. It's more from the perspective of, oh, look what he's doing to his wife. So she's just the wife. So the movie does exactly what Bernstein did. The first half of the movie is very hard to watch, in my opinion, because it's presented as this lovely dream come true when you, the audience, you know exactly what nightmare poor Felicia is getting into. And I mean, maybe the movie telegraphs it a little bit. You could argue that that's the point, that it is supposed to be a nightmare disguised as a dream. But I don't think it's strong enough, for Cooper to be able to lay claim to that's what he's doing. And also, Felicia says later on that she knew all about Bernstein's double life from the beginning, but the movie never makes that clear. I don't totally believe it, nor does it explain why she decided to marry him anyway. I mean, they kind of give like a few flimsy lines, but you're like, then why are you still here? And I mean, it seems crazy. I don't think they talk enough about the time period. I mean, it's such a complex thing to undertake, and to not really explore it, even though that's what the movie decided to be about, is again really weird. Again, it's all about, look, Bradley Cooper is Leonard Bernstein. That's like the whole movie. Oh, it's in black and white. Now it's in color. Oh, it's so crazy. And you're like, are we going to dig into this or not? And for instance, did Bernstein truly love his wife? Like, love her? Was he bisexual, at least when it came to her? Or did he instead love what she gave him, what she signified, a traditional family? And that allowed him to have his cake and eat it too, because he was off cheating on her left and right. But what about Felicia? She wasn't able to have any cake and eat it too. She was just frosting cake and then standing there in the corner. I mean, the strokes are just too broad. But then, in the second half of the film, it started to get a little bit more interesting, at least to me, because Felicia finally started to stand up for herself and wake up a little bit. You're like, finally! And we also see how her whole life has just been standing next to Bernstein, sometimes adored by him, sometimes totally ignored by him. Like, the chutzpah on Bernstein. You're like, I can't believe this guy did this to this woman. And I can't believe everyone around him seemed to think that it was okay. No one pulled him aside and was like, what are you doing, Bernie? You're being really mean. But then, suddenly, Felicia's life is over. And that's shocking. It's shocking and sad and moving, and it just reminds you of the fragility of life and how precious it is, and how Felicia, to some degree, was made to, she gave hers over to Bernstein like he was a vampire. I mean, Carey Mulligan, who doesn't look anything like the real Felicia Montelegre, by the way, she does have a wonderful, nobody has this anymore. It's like 1940s to 60s. It's like a quasi story time British accent. Like they had it in a lot of Disney animation back in the day, right? So Carey Mulligan nails that beautifully. But she is given 2 incredible scenes that are such a gift to an actress, and she knocks them out of the park, that I think will seal the deal for her Best Actress nomination. Maybe she'll win. I don't like the overall film, and I think her performance, I think the character's not fully written, but I think she'll definitely be nominated for these 2 scenes. No spoilers, but it's lunch at the plaza and then a doctor's office, which made me cry. She really was very good in those scenes. Back to Cooper, as I said, it's almost like he's playing a cartoon character, as he always plays Bernstein in an 11. And I was like, was that really what Bernstein was like? And I watched some of his interviews, particularly some of the ones later in his life, and he was a really big persona. But he must have had some quiet moments too. Nobody's always at an 11. I mean, I guess there's brief little moments, but you can see I guess in those moments, Bradley Cooper's eyes pop through the prosthetics and the wig, and you're like, there's Bradley Cooper. And so that takes you out of those moments too. As for the much talked about prosthetics, for the most part, I felt they were kind of convincing. Or as I said, at least they were interesting. You were like, that's something different. Early on in the film was when they're at their worst. He looks fully like a puppet in some cases, right? Or they're like, Maestro, brought to you by Jim Henson. Or he's wearing a full mask. But as I said, you can always kind of see Cooper's own eyes coming through. And you're always very aware that it's Bradley Cooper playing Leonard Bernstein in the hopes of winning an Oscar. I almost feel like Bradley Cooper picked Leonard Bernstein because he felt he could look the most like him with some help from some prosthetics. That's what I felt the play was. Not that he was super into Leonard Bernstein or wanted to tell this story. He was like, and I think also the closeted thing appealed to him for, again, the Oscar play. Because again, he didn't go into Bernstein's work at all, which again was so bizarre. At the beginning of the screening, they told a story about how Bradley Cooper would come to so many rehearsals and performances for the New York Philharmonic to learn about being a conductor in the world of classical music. And for that to, except for one scene towards the end, to barely be in the movie is like, well, then why did you do that? It's weird. I mean, it's just a super obvious Oscar play. Like, wow, Bradley Cooper wants an Oscar should be the name of the movie. When he plays Bernstein as a much older man, it's then that the prosthetics are the most convincing and interesting. He's got full body prosthetics. They said it took 5 hours to do it, and it looks great. And Cooper also does, I think, a very good job mimicking the physical movements of a much older man. But boy, was he unprofessional. I can't believe he didn't get fired. But anyway, I guess it was a different time, but yikes. It's also weird to see Bernstein totally change his image as a person as he gets older. Not just coming out of the closet, but the entire way that he presents himself. He goes from being very debonair and put together to extremely loose and theatrical, to the point that some of his clothes come across as costumes. Now, maybe the movie is trying to say that the latter Bernstein later in his life was what he was always like, but he just had to hide it from the world. But at the beginning of the movie, he is living his truth until becoming more famous makes him have to hide it. But he wasn't very flamboyant at the beginning of the movie. So you're like, where did this come from? It's just such a stark change. It seems like he becomes again increasingly a caricature. The Bernstein children have been extremely supportive of this movie. They, in fact, introduced it, particularly because of the actors' strike still going on, and none of the actors could be there. Bradley Cooper was in the audience, but he wasn't allowed to come on stage or say anything. But one of them, by the way, only one of them spoke, and they were very silly. I thought was interesting. So I was like, she's very much her father's daughter. Although then that wasn't portrayed in the movie. Like, none of the kids in the movie were silly. So anyway, I think it's interesting that they really support this movie when it makes their father look just so awful. You're like, wow, like, I guess it's justice for their mother. But they were saying some nice stuff about their dad up there. I mean, he didn't just destroy Felicia's life, as I said, like a vampire, but there were men who were also in Leonard Bernstein's life, that he just also was so callous and ran right over. And for a substantial period of time, he was really horrible to his kids. So I guess that's why they're okay with the movie. They're like, yeah, tell it like it was. But we still love him. And that's a complex relationship. I buy that. That could very much be the truth, but it's not portrayed in the movie. The Bernstein family is either the perfect family or they're horribly broken. There's no in between for them. And maybe that's what it's like for the Bernstein family in real life. Maybe that's why they're able to support this movie and give these opening statements about and make it seem like their family's so great. And then you watch the movie and you're like, wait a minute, your family was horrible. But then have the movie show the family, the Bernstein family, making that choice. They're like, yeah, we know our life is awful, but we've just decided to be perfect. And that's what we present to the world. And that's interesting. Just like our dad made a choice of what he had, at least at first, presented to the world. You know, our family is also, I guess to some degree, our emotional trauma is in the closet. But that's all fascinating, but it's not in the movie. I guess you could say, well, you just thought of it, Grace, but I had to dig so deep for it. I don't think Bradley Cooper did the work. And for a movie, as I said, where Cooper's Bernstein proclaims that his entire life is centered around music and it's what keeps him going, there's very little of it in the movie. I mean, it's in the film for sure. And if you're looking for it, you'll find it. But it's not a major part of the film. It's not a character in the movie, which it should be, as one would expect. On the Town, West Side Story, these are footnotes. On the Town is more used for its dancing than the music that Bernstein himself actually wrote. These should be monumental turning points in Bernstein's life. And Stephen Sondheim, the upcoming lyricist on West Side Story, is only mentioned once, which gets a laugh because they're like, I think he might be going somewhere. And you're like, you think? And then Jerome Robbins shows up very briefly, played by the extremely talented Michael Urie, who I would always like to have more of. And you're like, it occurs to me, especially, after when I was doing my notes for this review, all these gay and bisexual men, all these LGBT men came up together at around the same time. Aaron Copland also is briefly in the mix. And I'm sure that they helped each other get a foothold into the business and move forward. Networking is a big part of any business, particularly the arts. And these men, this group of gay men, they changed classical theater, classical music and musical theater. And they put America on the map in these areas where before it was mostly just European, and Russian-centric, right? And they also brought classical music and musical theater into mainstream America, into pop culture. You would think a movie about Leonard Bernstein would celebrate that tremendous achievement and how the gay community did that. But instead it focuses on how his being in the closet ruined his wife's life. And it's very sad to me to think that many people who see this movie, and this is their introduction and perhaps their only time with Leonard Bernstein, that this is how they would see him. But the movie is, again, very pretty to look at, right, with grand visual flourishes. And it so very much wants to be art. It so very much wants to be an important movie. And therefore, through sheer force of will from Bradley Cooper, at moments it is those things. But again, in other places it just falls so horribly and tragically short. Matt Bomer, Gideon Glick, and Maya Hawke all managed to break through in what is overall essentially a two-hander. And Sarah Silverman, I would say, is a nice bit of stunt casting. I mean, she doesn't pull too much focus, but she's really just there to be, oh, hey, isn't that Sarah Silverman? So I suppose you have to see Maestro. I mean, you have to, because it's such a big swing, and especially if you're into movies and award season, you're going to have to check it out. You're going to have to. But I just wish that Bradley Cooper had actually been interested in Leonard Bernstein instead of a relentless pursuit of Oscar. And I hope that it inspires you to actually look more into Bernstein and his peers and not just to judge him solely by his personal life. It would be like judging Steve Jobs solely by the horrible relationship he had with his daughter. All right, so share your thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.